Yes, now, bless now. Don't forget the rest now. There's Rocksteady at King of the Pit TV. We're going to learn about heavy metal people classes in session, alright? We're continuing on the series of our deep dive into heavy metal. We're going into the 60s and the early 70s here, alright? So we did the 50s to the 60s last time. We're getting to the riffs now, people. So critics disagree over who can be thought of as the first heavy metal band. Most credit either Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath. Now, I always come into Sabbath. Everyone's always saying Sabbath, 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 Sabbath. You know what I mean? Zeppelin get a little bit of credit here and there, but I've never heard them being referenced as, the first heavy metal band. With American commentators tending to favour Led Zeppelin and British commentators tending to favour Black Sabbath, while many give equal credit to both. Deep Purple, the third band in what is sometimes considered the unholy trinity of heavy metal, along with Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, fluctuated between many rock styles until late '69, when they took a heavy metal direction. A few commentators, mainly American, argue for other groups including Iron Butterfly, Steppenwolf, Blue Cheer or Vanilla Fudge as the first to play heavy metal. In 1968, the sound that would become known as heavy metal began to coalesce. That January, San Francisco band Blue Cheer released a cover of Eddie Cochran's classic Summertime Blues as a part of their debut album, Vincebus Eruptum, and many consider it to be the first true heavy metal recording. The same month, Steppenwolf released their self-titled album, on which the track Born to be Wild Born to be Wild refers to heavy metal thunder lyrically in describing a motorcycle. Heavy metal thunder. You know what? Yeah, it's pretty rocking, that number. In July, the Jeff Beck Group, whose leader had preceded Page as the Yardbirds guitarist, released its debut record, Truth, which featured some of the most molten, barbed, downright funny noises of all time, breaking ground for generations of metal axe-slingers. In September, Page's new band Zeppelin that's Led Zeppelin if you didn't know, made its live debut in Denmark, but were billed as the new Yardbirds. The Beatles' self-titled double album released in November included Helter Skelter, then one of the heaviest sounding songs ever released by a major band. The Pretty Things rock opera SF Sorrow, released in December, featured proto-heavy metal songs such as Old Man Going and I See You. Iron Butterfly's 1968 song Inagada da Vida, which Slayer covered, is sometimes described as an example of the transition between acid rock and heavy metal, or the turning point in which acid rock became heavy metal, and both Iron Butterfly's 1968 album Inagada da Vida and Blue Cheer's 1968 album, I'm not going to try to pronounce that again, have been described as laying the foundation of heavy metal and greatly influential in the transformation of acid rock into heavy metal. In this counterculture period, MC5, who began as the Detroit garage, as part of the Detroit garage rock scene, developed a raw, distorted style that has been seen as a major influence on the future sound of both heavy metal and later punk music. The Stooges also began to establish an influence of heavy metal and later punk sound with songs such as I Wanna Be Your Dog, featuring pounding and distorted heavy guitar metal power chord riffs. Pink Floyd released two of their heaviest and loudest songs to date, Ibiza Bar and the Nile song, the latter of which was regarded as one of the heaviest songs the band has recorded. King Crimson's debut started with 21st Century Schizoid Man, 21st Century Schizoid Man, which was considered heavy metal by several critics. In January 1969, Led Zeppelin's self-titled debut album was released and reached number 10 on the Billboard album charts. In July, Led Zeppelin and the power trio with a Cream-inspired but cruder sound called Grand Funk Railroad played the Atlanta Pop Festival. That same month, another Cream-rooted trio, led by Leslie West, released Mountain, an album filled with heavy blues, rock guitar and roaring vocals. In August, the group, now itself dubbed Mountain, played an hour-long set at the Woodstock Festival, exposing the crowd of 300,000 people to the emerging sound of heavy metal. Mountain's proto-metal or early... Anybody heard of Mountain before? I've never heard of Mountain before. Mountain's proto-metal or early heavy metal hit song Mississippi Queen. Right, Mountain. Mississippi Queen, alright? From the album Climbing is... Mississippi Queen. Is that the song? Mississippi Queen. I never knew the band was called Mountain who did that. From the album Climbing is especially credited with paving the way for heavy metal and was one of the first heavy metal songs to receive regular play on the radio. In September '69, the Beatles released the album Abbey Road, containing the track I Want You, She's So Heavy, which has been credited as an early example of or influence on heavy metal or doom metal. In October '69, British band High Tide debuted with the heavy proto-metal album Sea Shanties. Right. Led Zeppelin defined central aspects of the emerging genre, with Page's highly distorted guitar style and singer Robert Plant's dramatic wailing vocals. Other bands with a more consistently heavy, purely metal sound would prove equally important in codifying the genre. The 1970 releases by Black Sabbath, which is generally accepted as the first heavy metal album, and Paranoid, and Deep Purple's Deep Purple in Rock were crucial in this regard. Birmingham's Black Sabbath... Birmingham's like 20 minutes away from me. Birmingham's Black Sabbath had developed a particularly heavy sound, in part due to an industrial accident guitarist Tony Iommi suffered before co-founding the band. Unable to play normally, we're going to have a look into Black Sabbath, by the way. We're going to have a little deep dive into that band, so I'm actually going to open up... Yeah, we'll just open up the debut and go from there. We're gonna do a series on Sabbath next. Have a look into that. I don't know much about Sabbath, to be honest. So, unable to play normally, Iommi had to tune his guitar down for easier fretting and rely on power chords with their relatively simple fingering. The bleak industrial working class environment of Birmingham, a manufacturing city full of noisy factories and metalworking, has itself been credited with influencing Black Sabbath's heavy, chugging, metallic sound and the sound of heavy metal in general. That's very interesting. I've never come into that concept, and if so, you know how it is. Deep Purple had fluctuated between styles in its early years, but by '69, vocalist Ian Gillan and guitarist Ritchie Blackmore had led the band towards developing heavy metal style. In 1970, Black Sabbath and Deep Purple scored major UK chart hits with Paranoid and Black Knight, respectively. That same year, two other British bands released debut albums in a heavy metal mode. Uriah Heep with Very Heavy, Very Humble, and UFO with UFO 1. Bloodrock released their self-titled debut album, a collection of guitar riffs, gruff-style vocals, and sadistic and macabre lyrics. The influential Budgie brought the new metal sound into a power trio context, creating some of the heaviest music of the time. The occult lyrics and imagery employed by Black Sabbath and Uriah Heep would prove particularly influential. Led Zeppelin also began foregrounding such elements with its fourth album, released in 1971. In 1973, Deep Purple released the song Smoke on the Water, whose iconic riff is usually considered as the most recognisable one in heavy rock history, as a single of the classic live album made in Japan. We're only referencing, you know what I mean, Deep Purple, Sabbath and Zeppelin for the most part here. Deep Purple isn't a band I've ever delved into, you know. On the other side of the Atlantic, the trend-setting group was Grand Funk Railroad, who is described as the most commercially successful American heavy metal band from 1970 until they disbanded in '76. They established the '70s success formula, continuous touring. Other influential bands identified with metal emerged in the US, such as Sir Lord Baltimore, Kingdom Come in 1970, Blue Oyster Cult, self-titled, came out in '72, Aerosmith in 1973, and Kiss, who put their debut out in '74. They're all self-titles, these debuts. Sir Lord Baltimore's 1970 debut album and both Humble Pie's debut and self-titled third album were among the first albums to be described in print as heavy metal, with As Safe as Yesterday is referred to by the term heavy metal in a 1970 review. Let's have a look at what that is. Humble Pie. Never listened to the band Humble Pie. You know, when it comes to the 60s and 70s, I'm not that clued up on that particular time. I'm biased to thinking it's boring, granddad rock stuff, in all honesty. Various smaller bands from the US, UK, and continental Europe, including Ban, Josephus, Leafhound, Primeval, Hard Stuff, Truth and Janie, Dust, JPT Scareband, Frigid Pink, Cactus, Irish Coffee, May Blitz, Captain Beyond, Toad, Granitius, Iron Claw, and Yesterday's Children, though lesser known outside of their respective scenes, proved to be greatly influential on the emerging metal movement. In Germany, Scorpions debuted with Lonesome Crow in 72, Blackmore, who had emerged as a virtuoso soloist with Deep Purple's highly influential album Machine Head in 1972, left the band in 75 to form Rainbow with Ronnie James Dio. Very interesting. I didn't know that. Singer and bassist for blues rock band. So what's Rainbow then? Is that classified as heavy metal? A British American rock band. So what do you think, people, of Rainbow heavy metal? I've never really listened to Rainbow. Singer and bassist for blues rock band Elf and future vocalist for Black Sabbath and heavy metal band Dio. Alright. Rainbow with Ronnie James Dio would expand on the mystical and fantasy-based lyrics and themes sometimes found in heavy metal, pioneering both power metal and neoclassical metal. Wow, these bands also built audiences via constant touring and increasingly elaborate stage shows. Cool. Right. Right, we're going to continue this on. On the flip side, I'll see you then, people.